Good evening. My name's Karen Kiefer, and I'm the director of the Church in the 21st Century Center. And thank you so much for coming this evening. I see a lot of familiar faces. This is our fourth installment in our Easter series for Revitalizing our church. Our first one was ideas from the Catholic press. Our second one was ideas from university presidents. Our third one, which was just last Monday, was ideas from professors in the pews. And this evening is ideas from lay business leaders. If, in fact, you have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to just fill out the form. There's like a card when you came in, and just write a question. And then at about 7:50, we're going to collect the questions, and we're going to collect them in this aisle. So just pass them down to that aisle. And then we'll read, some questions at the second half of the program. The program will end for those of you that are running out to watch the rest of the Bruins game or the Celtics game. It will end by 8:15. That said, we are going to update you on the scores throughout the night. Jack made me promise to do that. So we'll do. So tonight, we have three distinguished alums. Jack Connors, class of 63. Denise Morrison, class of 75. Chuck Clow, class of 64. You can read their bios in the one-sheeter when you walked in, but I can tell you they've all led companies. They've all led Boston College by serving on the board of trustees here, and they've all led our Catholic Church, being very invested in its future and its past. Before we start, and I want to just kind of hand the program over to Jack, it's the month of Mary. And for each session during this Easter series, we've begun with a prayer. So I ask you to stand and recite the Hail Mary, to pray for our church, and to also pray for the fruits of this conversation tonight, and pray for each and every one of us that is in this room that loves our church. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you. Jack, the floor is yours.
Karen, thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Karen, thanks very much. It's great to be back to BC. When Chuck and I were walking the hallways here, we never had a room like this. I mean, carpets. Imagine carpets. What an interesting concept. So, Denise, tell us from your perspective, perhaps from Marco Island, Florida, or wherever, New Jersey before
Where
that.
it's 89 degrees.
Yeah. The state of the church as you see it today.
So I will say that my comments tonight are going to be out of love for the Catholic faith, and they're just opinions. I am humbled to be here and share these comments, so thank you very much for including me, Karen. I appreciate that. So the state of Catholicism, I look at, first of all, the external forces that are out there, which I call seismic shifts, where you have a demographic shift from 80 million baby boomers to 80 million millennials. So 2 generations. A much more diverse population for the church to serve. The economic bifurcation that's going on with a shrinking middle class in the U.S., and a division between haves and have-nots, which is becoming a lot more pronounced, presenting its challenges. And then I also believe that the technology revolution has fundamentally changed the way people are communicating. They're certainly changing the way people are shopping and the way that people are interacting with each other. So those are pretty big seismic shifts. But the one fundamental one that just startled me was that the American family of mom, dad, and 2 kids are only 24% of the population now. So you've got 6 different types of families out there, whether it's multi-generational, multicultural, same-sex, single mothers, it is a hodgepodge. And the reason why that's so significant is because our Catholic faith has been built on the nuclear family. And it's just something that we have to deal with when, as the church brings Jesus to people, which is the noble purpose. So I think, some of the things that are going on with reduction in vocation is very concerning. Are we going to have enough priests in the future? For every one Catholic that's converted, 6 are leaving the church. So there's been a decline in the numbers. The scandals that have happened have really disheartened people, and so the way they've been handled in terms of transparency or lack thereof is eroding some trust in the church, and that's an issue that's got to be dealt with. So this whole area of trust and relevance to a changing landscape is a daunting challenge, and one not only faced by the church as an institution, but also by companies and governments and everything else. But I've always been an advocate of, look, if you confront the brutal facts, then you'll find solutions. And really, it all comes back to purpose and the purpose of bringing Jesus to people. So that's really my assessment of it. I don't have all the answers, folks, but I do think that that the Catholic Church has a lot to work with. There are many people of strong faith. There are wonderful priests. There is a wonderful business model with the parish system. It is local, it's community. Some do it better than others, but it's strong and it can be strengthened. So and we also have a population of young people coming up that literally I have a lot of hope in that can take our church forward. So it's not all gloom and doom, but it is a call to action to get organized.
So let's see, who's next here? Why don't we call on Chuck Clow?
Well, Jack, it's been quite a while since I could string 4 sentences together through memory, so I'll rely on some notes. Wait
a minute, that's the recipe for brownies. You can't use
it. Is. I mean, whatever it takes. I don't know many people realize this, but the 2 longest living institutions in the Western world are the U.S. Constitution and the Roman Catholic Church. The 2 longest living institutions. And a fair question to ask is, which one will outlive the other, since both are under stress right now? I told Dr. Tom Groom I'd quote him, and this is on the C21 website, but he points out that Jesus' mandate to us is to hand on the faith to the next generation. And I guess by extension, he means the generation after that and the generation after that. And I guess the answer to the question of the first one, which would be the longest living institution if we look down the future, is how good we are at doing that. How good will we be at passing down our faith to the next generation? Now, any of you grew up in Boston, or probably New York, or any of the eastern cities. In the 1940s and 1950s, I grew up on the streets of Boston. In fact, I grew up just down the hill from Jack. And our lives away from school were dominated by parish life. You didn't live in Jamaica Plain or West Roxbury. You lived in St. Thomas's Parish or Holy Family or Holy Name Parish, and everything from the CIO to the Saturday night dance. Your entire social life out of school, and I was public school, so even with that, you dominated the church. I didn't have any Protestant or Jewish friends till I got to high school. That's how tight those communities were, and of course they were very pervasive. We all know that the number today, we know the church numbers are declining, and I watch this in the Archdiocese of Boston pretty carefully, but both of you, any of you probably have experienced the 2 evangelization programs that have been undertaken in the Archdiocese of Boston. One was several years ago. It was called Catholics Coming Home, or Catholics Come Home, and that consisted of Chancery sending out audiovisual material to the 290 parishes in the Archdiocese, and they'd show this really well done video, which would show how vibrant and beautiful Catholic life is. but nothing really changed. I mean, people came back, but since they found parish life the same it was when they left the first time, they left. And then more recently, you've heard of Disciples in Mission. That's the effort to really sort of reorganize the parish. We can't close parishes. No parish will be closed, but we've moved them into collaboratives, and some are working. Some have better resources and can be livelier place. But when you look at the numbers in the Archdiocese of Boston, and I won't spend too much on this, but every 10 years, they count the sacraments and the number of people at church. And you go back over the last 10 years, the number of Catholics in the pews on Sunday or Saturday are down 19% over the last 10 years. That's been sort of a steady erosion. The number of baptisms are down 19%. The number of confirmations are down 19%. And the number of marriages are down 57%. So think about that for a minute. What does that say about the next generation? And I think, to go back to Dr. Groom's idea of passing on the faith, part of the question is going to be to whom? But more importantly, obviously people aren't being fed. People in the pews aren't being fed, either by spirituality or by liturgy or whatever. And I think those are the areas we sort of really have to think about. What is the experience of the person in the pew? More importantly, what is the experience of the person in the pew going to be 20 years from now, or 40 years from now, or 60 years from now? Now, the Council of Trent went on between 1543 and 1568, and almost 500 years ago. And that council created the model of church, really, that we have today. Everything from the Tridentine Mass, which kind of morphed after Vatican II into the liturgy we experience today. And we're supposed to be business people talking about the church. How many 500-year-old business models would survive in the world today? And the answer is there's going to be change. And that's why I think, and I'm mirroring Denise's comment, I think it's a terribly exciting time to be Catholic. I think it's a terribly exciting time because we're probably going to see in the change in the next generation or two as dynamic as the Council of Trent. It will be that profound. And the question is, will we take it? Will we take our church? And I say our church because I think of all the great popes we experienced in the 20th century, I think John the 23rd was really the greatest. And during the council, during the Vatican Council, he came up with a brilliant insight into our spirituality and who we are as church. He said, we are the people of God. And, we talk about it, and I think after that everybody forgot about it, but he said, we are the people of God. And I think he meant it. And I think it's more a profound statement than he thinks, because going over the next few generations, I think we'll be dealing with a less clerical church. The Roman Catholic Church will become less clerical. Any simple, and I'm not talking my book because as a deacon I'm ordained, so they're going to kick me out everywhere, right? Tom, we'll go together. We'll go quietly, but I think we will become a less clerical church, and I think one of the most powerful things that will affect change in the church is happening, just maybe a quarter of a mile from us at the School of Theology and Ministry. Oh. Now, back in 2001, Father Leahy started a trustee committee on mission and character, he called it. And the way he expressed it to me at the time was, I have to make sure that the Jesuit Catholic presence stays on the Boston College campus when there aren't any more Jesuits. He had that foresight. Well, he put that off maybe by a generation or two by acquiring Western Jesuit School of Theology, and we got plenty of Jesuits. So we don't have to worry about that right now, but sometime we will, and sometime all Catholic universities will have to worry what happens when you don't have the clerical presence as dominant as today. We have to, we have to live out our baptism. In our baptism, we become, part of the priesthood of Christ. And I think all of these things that sound like cliches today, as we go through the next generation or two, are going to become reality. We will be the church. And I think all of those young people and not so young people, maybe, coming out of STM, they're all called like the rest of us, if they're willing to put aside, make a lot of money doing ministry, but so obviously they're called and they've got real capability. And I think perhaps one of the most important things that might change, and I'm just guessing here, is what's the power of the homily. We'll always have the Eucharist. The Eucharist obviously is the center of but the homily is a pretty important part of it. And I think the most powerful homily is a person, a lay person, telling us about their faith life, telling about their conversion to faith. What happened? How did it work? And that'd be a powerful something. I'm thinking of a model where both of those aspects are taken together, that we can be called by our baptism, but really live out the priesthood of God, or the priesthood of Christ. And how all of these things will change are going to be fascinating. But I think the bottom line is it is going to be a very exciting time to be a Catholic.
Thanks, Chuck. So some of you may recall the TV program Sesame Street, and they'd show 2 beans and a carrot. And the song was, one of these things is not like the other. I think I'm the carrot tonight. I love these perspectives, and I really appreciate both of you saying what you said. I have a slightly different perspective. Tonight is more, you had journalists, you had clergy, you had professors, etc. This is kind of a gathering of, a small gathering of business types. And when you ran the Campbell Soup Company, can you hear me? Okay. I have one of these things here. I'll tell you what.
All you have to do is press that button.
Can you hear me now? Good. Can you hear me now? So, the Campbell Soup Company is 150 years old. You spent a fair amount of time at Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch is 105 years old. I was in the advertising business at Hill Holliday, started it 51 years ago. Catholic Church is 2,000 years old, 2,000 plus. And I think it's shown its age. As a business model, I think it's broken. And I think, I only say that because I care about it, hopefully as much as the two of you do. I think over 2,000 years, you can just imagine how many sort of secret societies there were and how many organizations and clubs and so on and so forth. Can also appreciate that for the most part, wars that were fought in this world were fought as a result of one person's religious opinion versus another, or one community versus another. I think that after 2,000 years, it's time for a reboot. In my little office, people are rebooting maybe 2 or 3 times a day. I think after 2,000 years, we deserve a reboot. And I think 2,000 years ago, things were a lot different. And I ask myself this question once in a while: what would Jesus think if he were to take a look at what goes on in the world today in the name of the faith that he founded? I don't think he'd be impressed by any of the abuse charges. I don't think he'd be impressed by a Vatican Museum that has amazing resources, but there's an awful lot of poor people just outside the Vatican Museum that can't afford a meal. I think it's time that this 2,000-year-old company kind of open the windows and let in some fresh air. I think it needs to be a lot more honest with itself and transparent. I think there's been way too much secrecy. I think the great news is there are people like the two of you who serve and represent the church. And Denise, I've only known you for a little while, but I've watched Chuck for maybe 2 generations, and I've never met anybody who was the more appropriate poster child for our faith. If you're an example of the future of our faith, then we're in great shape. But I spent at the encouragement of the Cardinal, then Archbishop, I've spent the last dozen years raising $100 million to rebuild Catholic schools. When Archbishop Sean, then, before he was made a Cardinal, became Archbishop of Boston, in his installation speech or homily at the cathedral, said that the Catholic school system is the second largest school system in the country after the public school system. I was impressed by that. In 1965, there were 250 parish Catholic schools. Today, there are 85. we've closed 3 a year on average, every year for 51 years, 54 years. Most of the Catholic parish schools that exist today are on the bubble. They can just barely make ends meet. Many of them have been converted to condominiums. So he sent us to Brockton, he sent us to Dorchester to work with the poor parishes in both of those areas. And we went into the basement and found out that the Catholic Church was the largest purchaser of duct tape because the boilers were wrapped in duct tape. We went into the classrooms and found that the asbestos tile floors were chipped, and the chips were in the atmosphere. We tried to open the windows, but they wouldn't open, and if they opened, they wouldn't close. So for $10-12 million a copy, we rebuilt every one of those old red brick buildings. And today there's 1,500 kids in those schools. But that took a lot of money, a lot of focus, a lot of dedication. And a lot of people don't feel invited. They don't feel welcomed. They're welcome to Mass. They're welcome to the sacraments. They're welcome to help with the various missions, the corporal works of mercy, whatever you want to call them. But they're not necessarily welcome when it comes to figuring out how we're going to run this thing for the next 2,000 years. And men are more welcome than women. And women are more welcome than gays. And we happen to be in a world today where we're all supposed to be welcoming each other. I don't care who's married to whom. I have a son, Eileen, I have a son who's married to a Jewish girl. I don't care that she's Jewish. She's a wonderful wife to our son. Some of our best friends aren't Irish, you know. But we really do need to kind of to be honest with each other. A classic example, and then we'll go on to some questions. But Boston College is 156 years old. Chuck was in the first class back then. I came in 2 or 3 years later. Boston College, for the first 109 years, was run by the Jesuits. The board was a Jesuit board. Father J. Donald Monin decided, we're not going to do that anymore. There's going to be 40 members of the board, plus or minus, and 34 of them are going to be lay men and women. One who runs a bank, one who runs an insurance company, one who runs a whatever, and they're going to help us figure out the future. And is there anyone who walks around this campus today, 40-some-odd years after that happened, 47 years after that change of governance, where the Jesuits really no longer own Boston College, the board does. And the endowment when Father Monin made that decision was $15 million, mostly restricted. What's the endowment today, Chuck? $2.6 billion. So is this university any less great because it's not 100% controlled by the church? I don't think so. This is a classic example of a partnership that's been enormously successful, and it's not the only one. Holy Cross, Notre Dame, on and on and on. That when you bring in the folks who are not Jesuit or not clerical, and you work in partnership with them, just imagine what happens.
So one idea could be, could the U.S. Conference of Bishops have a board a board of advisors that come from different walks of life? Because you've got two things going on. You've got the work of God, and then you've got the business of the church. And, you know, to think that clergy has to do all of that might be short-sighted, or there might be a shortage, so you can't do it that way, to your point. And so there could be a model that the universities have figured out of necessity that, you know, might work for that level.
You know, there is a spirit, and he works in strange ways, but you know, Jeff Boise, a former trustee of this university, runs an organization that's nationwide now called the Leadership Council, and it's specifically designed and has been accepted, I think, in just about every major diocese. as an important source of bringing business principles to the management of the church. So that's pretty much underway. But then I just think that'll become ever more critical. But yeah, I think that is.
I never heard about that. You know, so there's also a communication opportunity. You know, for the church to explain some of the things to people in terms of, well, what are we doing differently? How are we pursuing some of these different ways of improving the experience for parishioners, for people of the flock, so to speak. So I think that's an opportunity.
You know, it strikes me that the two of you, can I still have this?
Sure.
Follow, brother. It strikes me that the two of you are kind of poster children, again, for the future of our faith. The church's history has really had a lot more to do with the past, because that is history, than the business plan for the future. Has anybody here seen the business plan for the future of the Catholic Church? All right. I don't think one exists. I think they've spread out. So, for example, the pastor of a parish is the lord of the manor. He is the captain of his ship. So, for example, when we were digging into these schools in Brockton and Dorchester, the pastor wasn't 45 with 4 curates. We have 4 children. I don't know if they know what a curate is, but the pastor is in charge of that school. The pastor's not 45 anymore. He's 68. And when you look at pedagogy, when you look at technology, how is one man who's probably running 3 parishes supposed to keep up with technology? So that whole notion that the pastor is king. So when we went to Brockton, we went to Dorchester, we took the pastor out. He's on the board, but he no longer runs that school. And the people in the community, the business people in that community, success for the future of our faith is a team sport.
You know, I think to some extent, you know, I think even here, we've got great youth ministry at Boston College in so many different dimensions, and I know a lot of the youngsters and have done retreats with them. It's funny when they graduate. Of course, they're certainly committed to their faith, and they've lived it, and it's certainly been transformational. But sometimes they get back into the parish where the rectory's dead, and you lose it. You know, and fortunately, in this diocese, many other archdioceses, there are other ways of building faith. There's Cursillo. Well, I've done youth ministry for a long time. We started with Teen Encounter, which was a high school program, and that's still going. Then there was To Encounter Christ, Tech we called it. That's for college age and younger. That's still going. And there's lots of Cursillo. So there are ways of really, you know, being open to the Spirit in a way like that. But eventually you got to go back to the parish, and the life has to be lived in the parish. And I think that's the model that really has to be thought about and changed. And I know, you know, we're very fortunate. We've got good leadership, and it's a strong parish. We had a first communion service Saturday night. I wasn't on for that one. I'll be on for this one. But one mother I know very well, she said, "Oh, I love my parish." I mean, it was an uplifting liturgy, and when it works well, it's a fantastic experience. But you know, for all the reasons we know, it's working less and less well as we go through time.
One idea could be those parishes that are working well. In businesses, if a division is working better than another one, you start to look at, well, what are the best practices and the key drivers of that success? And then how do you scale that up and get that around? You want the parishes to keep their local touch, you know, especially in a high-tech world. That local touch is so critical, but there may be a template or certain principles that are working in certain parishes that could benefit some of the other ones and make that a better experience.
So if I can borrow someone's microphone. Thank you, Denise. So a story. One of our own, if I may use that phrase, is a fellow who is a very, very dear friend of mine, of Eileen's and mine, and I think of Chuck and Gloria's. His name is Nick Sinella. And Nick had a lot of challenges figuring out what he wanted to be when he grew up. So he became a lawyer. And he wasn't crazy about the law, so he became a vascular surgeon, which is what most lawyers do when they don't want to be a lawyer. And then he wasn't nuts about that either, so he decided that what he wanted to do was become a priest. So he went to the Delayed Vocation Seminary out in Weston. 4 years later, he was a parish priest. They sent him to Wakefield for 2 years, and Cardinal Sean O'Malley saw the enormous intellectual capacity and the talent and the enthusiasm, etc. So he handed over the parish in Lowell called the Church of the Immaculate Conception in Lowell. It was dirty. It was empty. It was lonely. The rectory had 26 bedrooms. This is kind of a story of our faith. He was the only person in the rectory. Now the downside is obvious. That was lonely, but the upside was he had a different view every night. So he invited me to come up to Lowell and see his parish. We went in the sacristy. She took me through the rectory. Went in the sacristy. There's one of these panels of light switches. He switched on what must have been 30 lights, light up the whole church. And he walked in, and he stood just below the altar, and he's a big guy. And he put his arms out, and he said, "This is my church." And I've never seen anyone more proud or grateful for his mission. And it occurred to me at that time that 100 years earlier, this big church, which has now been fully restored, is absolutely beautiful and extraordinary. It occurred to me at that time that, let's say 100 years ago when it was built 120 years ago, just imagine that the local bishop probably had a celebratory mass to thank the stone cutters and the carpenters and the stained glass window makers and all the artisans that were involved in building this beautiful church. Here's what occurred to me. What will we build? A lot of us have become users, and I think we need to be builders. I think the only way this faith gets restored and becomes something very, very special, as it is really in many parts of the world and many parts of the city, but as it becomes ubiquitously successful, if there is such an adverb as ubiquitously, the only way that's going to happen is if we all kind of make it happen. We don't have to come together and sing Kumbaya, but we have to go into Arch Street. Thank you very much, Father. Just a $30 plug here. We have to go to St. Ignatius. We have to go to St. this, St. that, Holy Name, Sacred Heart, wherever. And we have to say, put me to work. I want to help rebuild. I want to be a builder. I don't want to be a user. I want to be a builder. And so if I'm critical of the church, of the faith, it's because I'm critical of us. And I throw myself into that sometimes as well. Rarely, but sometimes.
There's a lot of there's a lot of studies of health and all, and it has been proven that people of faith live longer. They recover from heart attacks. Somebody must have done this research somewhere in the New England Journal of Medicine or something. But people who are faithful, they have a living faith, they live longer. They recover from heart attacks quicker. It does affect your physical life, your health, and just having the living Jesus as part of your life. So we got something awfully good to sell. And I don't understand why the pews are emptying out, and I don't think they'll continue. We'll bottom this out somewhere. But I think to take Jack's step one step further, I do think maybe the thought, and I'm repeating myself, but I'm doing it purposely because I think we have to think of ourselves as more than just lay people who do things because Father tells us to, or in my case, Sister tells us to, and realize that we are also part of the priesthood of Christ, and we can be teachers of the faith by what we say and do. Sort of like the little line at the end of the baptism ceremony. You show this child the life of Christ by what you say and do. We say that to the parents, and I think that's really what we're called upon to do, is to be builders by what we say and do.
I just can't imagine how you navigate all of life's events without faith. I can't even comprehend that. And yet there's so many people that they've just lost touch with it. Where are we teaching the next generation the faith if, in fact, Catholic schools are closing, they're not getting it at home, they're learning from peer groups that don't have it? I mean, you see them turning to other things to fill that void. Unfortunately, some of those things are opioids, or you see very high rates of depression and despair. I know, look, life's tough sometimes, and if you have that sense of faith that you can call on and you could get you through those things. And, you know, I really believe that we've really overcomplicated it. Jesus was about love God and love your neighbor as yourself. He was about, look, the 12 apostles didn't sit home. They went out and they went to the people and they talked to the people about Jesus. They didn't really build these huge churches and wait for people to come. Now, we've got the luxury of these beautiful churches, but I still think we've got to go out and get more people to appreciate the faith, because that's what that's what it should be all about. When we're losing Catholics every day because they feel disenfranchised, maybe we should reflect on, well, what is it going to take to be relevant to people in order to bring Jesus to their lives and make their lives better, to your point. I mean, this is a big calling, and I think just to stick our heads in the sand and say, oh, well, if we just pray, it'll get better. It's not just about prayer. Prayer is important, but it's also about action too. And having the Holy Spirit be open to that. What is the plan of action?
I have one quick story, but you can tell yours first. You can tell you. Go
Chuck,
ahead.
no one believes you have one quick story, but go ahead.
There's a biography of Albert Einstein. Walter Isaacson wrote it, and in it there's this little story of the great physicist. He took a train out of Princeton. He was at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he was sitting in the coach seat, and the conductor came down and asked Dr. Einstein for your ticket. And he says, well, he felt in his pocket and no ticket, and felt in his pants, no ticket, and even felt in the back, no ticket. And then the conductor felt sorry for him. Of course, he knew. He said, well, don't worry, Dr. Einstein. I know who you are. Everybody knows who you are. And we all know you bought a ticket, so don't worry about it. And then walked down walked down the aisle, and then looked back and noticed that Dr. Einstein was on his hands and knees fishing under the seat. And he felt rather concerned about it. He came back and said, Dr. Einstein, please, you don't have to worry about it. We know you bought a ticket. And everybody knows who you are. And then he stood up and he says, don't worry, I know who I am. What I don't know is where I'm going. And I have no idea if the story is true or not, but I think, the advantage we have is we know where we're going. Jesus told us where we're going. And how we fix this 500-year-old business model or 2,000-year-old business model, however you want to look at it, how we fix it, we'll figure it out. But I think the real message of this evening is we have to fix it.
This all comes down to one, at least as business people, one observation. It's all about leadership. Why does one company work out better than another company? Well, sometimes it has to do with luck, but a lot of it the common denominator seems to be leadership. And you talk about just the Archdiocese of Boston, 360 parishes or whatever. We did a study under the Eisner or whatever commission 10 or 12 years ago, and we found out that of the 360, 120 had amazing pastors, 120 had terrible pastors, and 120 had average pastors. Well, there wasn't a problem for the 120 that had great pastors, but it was a real problem for the 120 that had terrible pastors, terrible by whatever series of measurements. And so we got a shortage of leadership. But what you've demonstrated is that there are other ways. Leadership does not require ordination. And that's not my line. It's too brilliant to come from me. But, and you, of course, have been ordained. But we don't have to be ordained to take up the gauntlet, so to speak, and say, that school, we're going to fix that school. That church, we're going to rebuild that church. We've got the Sisters of St. Joseph, who probably taught 1 out of every 4 people in this room. What have they got going today? They've got a bank account that eventually will be wiped out, taking care of the nuns in their senior years. We have business opportunities. There's a place called the Pork Layers on the Jamaica Way, not far from where you and I grew up. The building is a breathtakingly beautiful building. I used to think when I was 5 that they did magic shows there on Sunday, because you'd go in under your mother or father's hand, and you'd ask for a mass card for someone who passed, and there was a rotating thing, and you'd hear a woman's voice on the other end, and you'd put $1 in, and the wheel would go around, and next time you saw it was empty. Wheel would go around one more time. The $1 had been converted to a mass card. So there were 50 or 60 wonderful nuns living a cloistered life at this prayerful place. We're one of 2 states that has 2 orders of pork layers. I think the other might be in Andover. I'm not sure where. Today there's 18 in Jamaica Plain, West Roxbury, Jamaica Plain. And there's probably 18 in Andover. Do you think they'd ever come together and sell one and use the proceeds to protect their... They don't want to even talk to each other. And by the way, let's go over to St. Paul's that owns 22 acres in Jamaica Plain. And there's 12 nuns. Maybe there's 30 nuns. But that's 1 nun per acre, you know. And they've got and Jamaica Plain right next door to the Pork Layers, half a mile away. So the notion, if this were the Campbell Soup Company, if this were Swanson TV Dinners, if this were Merrill Lynch, if this were Clough Capital, if this were Hill Holiday, you wouldn't allow that lack of consolidation, that lack of coming together, because together they could rebuild and go forth in a stronger way. The church doesn't think like that. And it needs to, because even though it's really not the business of 2,000 years, it's the faith that's carried it through. It's a business, and everything's a business now. So the business of building our faith is a very big business.
It's a great product.
A great product. It's a great product. The packaging isn't always great.
You can update that.
You mentioned leadership, and when you think about leadership in a company, it starts with purpose. What's the higher order reason why you're doing this work, or why this company is in business to begin with? I mean, at Campbell's, it was real food that matters for life's moments. And then there's a set of values that go with that, so it's not just the what you're trying to do as a business, but it's the how. And the behaviors you desire in your culture that actually brings that to life. And I actually think if you ask 10 people, you know, what is the higher order purpose of the Catholic Church? You probably would get some different answers. If you ask what are the values, depending upon what order you ask, you'll get some different answers. And so there's an opportunity here for some real clarity, because I think in our hearts we really do know what those are. And if you can, you know, if you want to capture the hearts and minds, particularly of the next generation, which you talked about as our real obligation is to teach the faith and pass it down generation to generation, it's got to be done with the head, the heart, and the hands. It's getting the heart that's the tough part. But if you can really clearly articulate a purpose and values that people can connect to, that's leadership. And then you can mobilize people and galvanize them to do some pretty extraordinary things because they believe in it. And we just have an opportunity. The good part is I think all of the content is there. It's a matter of, of people stepping up and stepping out. But it's also a matter of how will the bishops react to that? How will the priests react to that? Are they welcoming of, the laity or whatever you want to call us to come in and really help? Or is it one of these? And I can tell you, as a woman, I don't feel, come on in, come on in, preach, do something. I think there's certain things that at the parish level that priests are comfortable with, but then there's other things it's not so much. And I do think that there are other groups that feel the same way, and that disenfranchises. And so, if you think about women in the church, Mary was the first power woman. Mary was an amazing woman. Think about the decision she had to make at 15 years old. That's unbelievable. I don't think I could have done it. I mean, but the example, time after time. Imagine being tasked with being the mother of God. Really? I mean, that is daunting right there. And she did it. And she did it with grace and poise. She had respect. She talked to children. She inspired. She motivated. She was awesome. I think of her as a role model. And yet, I don't know how many people are talking about Mary to the women in the Catholic Church as a role model. So there's so many opportunities if we could just invite people in to make a difference, as opposed to going like this to them.
Wow. That was awesome. Yeah, that was awesome. Can I have an amen?
Well, I'll double down on that before we go to questions. If you read the Acts of the Apostles carefully, there's a narrative about what appears to be the first Christian liturgy, and it sure sounds like it was presided over by somebody named Phoebe. You can go anywhere you want with that.
Wait a minute, whose side are you on, Chuck? So why don't we do two things? Let's take 20 minutes for applause and then 3 minutes for questions. All right, we'll do 2 seconds of applause and then let's jump right into some Q&A. Karen, we just want the easy questions. Yeah.
Give me a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, do we have a score of the game? 0-0. Okay. Bruins, all right. So, okay. Celtics up 7-31.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. First question. You're in the boardroom with Pope Francis. What's the first thing you want to say to him?
First thing I want to say is thank you. The second thing I want to say...
I was going to say second.
The second thing I want to say is the quote with which I most associate you is one of your early quotes. Who am I to judge? Mm-hmm. I mean, we got a lot of judges, and he chose not to be one. So, having trained here, the notion of having a Jesuit pope, I'm giving this fellow the benefit of the doubt.
I think he's awesome. I think he represents real hope. And I think his concept of the framework for human dignity is a huge idea. If you combine that with, the Jesuit philosophy of formation of mind, body, and soul, if we got up every morning and had real respect for human dignity, we wouldn't have 3/4, if not all, of some of the social issues that we're dealing with today. I think he's got a huge opportunity to bring that one forward and get people really emotional about it.
I think the quickest way is it's certainly a change in the nature of leadership under Francis. From a leadership of being so concerned about the faith, we tend to be kind of inward to moving towards compassion. That's the biggest change I see.
Okay, this next question, very creative. If you were designing a course for seminarians about church management, how would you structure it and what would you teach? If you were designing a course for seminarians about church management, how would you structure it and what would you teach?
Thank you for this opportunity. So, I talked earlier about opening the windows, letting in some fresh air. When we had the problems of clergy abuse in 2001, 2002, and many years before, but exposed in Boston in that time frame, it was interesting to see that Father Monin was the president of BC at the time, and he said, something is terribly wrong at St. John's Seminary. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the interesting things, there's a local example of this now. There's a group from North Attleboro, La Salette. They happen to be on North Attleboro, but they're also on the Cape where Eileen and I worship in Brewster. And they have a seminary in Michigan that they just closed because they couldn't afford it anymore. And they took the 18 men. By the way, unlike Chuck, I never let facts get in the way of a good story, so don't hold me to these numbers. But they took their 18 men. They bought a house on Foster Street or Bennett Street and in Brighton, and they're using Boston College to be their seminary. Now, I think that was first of all, it was a good business move because they couldn't afford the old model. But I think it was an enlightened move because I think these young men who make this commitment to the priesthood need to be spending more time in the community. Eventually, we're the people they're going to serve. Yeah. So it's good to have 4 Democrats in the House, I think. So I think it's just a matter of, when I talked earlier about the secrecy, et cetera, I think folks need to be exposed to the world the way it is today. And I think here there is that opportunity. But it's just one example of how you open this thing up. And there is no, to my understanding, there's no, in any seminary that I've ever heard of, there's no program on marketing, there's no program on fundraising, there's no program on CapEx management. I don't think it works that way. I think it's all logic, epistemology, theology, philosophy, whatever. And we have some brilliant people, but I'm not sure they know how to run the business of their parish or the business of their community.
Yeah, I think the course of study could be broader, but also teaching them skills like collaboration, networking, making sure that they realize that no leader, no matter how good you are, can do it all yourself. You got to surround yourself with the best talent, set goals, measure outcomes, and go. And I do think having seminarians go out and actually do work in the parishes during the course of their education and come back and deliberate on that could be a very positive thing. I don't know about you, Jack, but when I was a sales rep, they put me out in the field with many different sales reps to learn how to be a better sales rep. And why wouldn't you learn from some of the others that have gone before you? So a combination of classroom, but also actual experience.
Chuck, this question's directed to you. Do you think that the church can use more deacons?
I think the church. Do I think the church can use more deacons? Yeah, it's interesting. There aren't a plethora of applications for the diaconate either. And
Is it because people don't know enough about it?
I think they know because there's enough of us around today that I think most people know what a deacon is. They're not quite sure what he does, but they know he's there. And he has a Boy Scouts, and he's a Boy Scout sash. That's the you can tell that. I think I was ordained 33 years ago, and I obviously I was very welcome back at my parish because the pastor was elderly and he knew I'd do the hospital visits for him, and so he knew how to use me right off the bat. We are very useful. We can be useful in a parish. I think that's over. I think most pastors today are very happy to get a deacon, and there's no. I don't think people have any really think a distinction between the priest and deacon today. They're both. If you reach out, think about a diaconate. You can hang out and do nothing if you want, or you can be as involved as you want to be. Obviously, you don't have the responsibility for the parish the priest has, but I think we're certainly accepted as part of the ordained ministry. And if you reach out, they'll certainly. But I think, sure, there's probably, I'm sure there's 50 or 60 pastors out there would be more than happy to have another deacon. Yeah.
To the brand builders, how can the church rebuild trust in the institution and restore credibility and the brand?
My experience in brand building is that transparency builds trust. And that means that you need to be a bit vulnerable. But, in the food business, people want to know what's in their food. They want to know where it's grown, how it's made, what ingredients are in it, that it's made with integrity, that it's safe, it's high quality. It's no different with this. With building the brand of the Catholic Church, people want to know. They're interested. And they want transparency about what's working, what's not working, and what's needed, and how can they help. And I do think that by being more inclusive there and being much more transparent, that will help build the brand, because there is a trust and relevance crisis in the church today.
I think it's really quite simple. I think we have to get back to being transparent, as you say. But I think it goes back to my favorite quote from St. Francis of Assisi, who purportedly said in the 1500s, I wasn't there at the time, well, a couple of people in this audience I think were actually, who purportedly said, preach the gospel at all times, even if you have to use words. And I think it's example. I remember as a kid growing up in Rosendale and going to the Holy Name Church, I thought that the priests at the Holy Name Church, I thought they were directed by God to come to Rosendale and take care of the sheep. I thought they were the shepherds. I thought it was all on the level. And I'm not so sure it's all on the level anymore. But I will say this, what keeps me going to Mass about 3 or 4 days a week and praying the rosary about 3 or 4 days a week is that I know of no other organization in the history of this country, other than maybe the federal government at its best, which is not right now, by the way, but that's another seminar. I know of no organization that does as much good as the Catholic Church. And you see it, George Herbert Walker Bush talked about 1,000 points of light. There are 1,000,000 points of light in the Catholic faith. And we could go 4 miles in any direction, any point on the compass. You pick the point on the compass and we'll go in that direction 4 miles, and we'll probably bump into 3 missions just within 4 miles of here. And those missions are not there to serve the 1%. Sometimes they're funded by the 1%, which is why the balance is important. But they're not there to serve the 1%. They're to serve the folks that need it the most. And it goes back to the fundamentals of the corporal works of mercy. That's what's going on every day, every afternoon, every night across this country. And more often than not, it's done by a religious group. And more often than not, it's done by a Catholic religious group because we happen to be probably the biggest faith in the country. So that notion that we have a great sense, as you two have spoken, of the fundamentals is what keeps me here. I was there with Cardinal Law the Friday before the spotlight drop of the newspapers on that Sunday. I saw evil firsthand, and that's not the faith I signed up for. The faith I signed up for is the one that goes on at this college, this university, every day. They teach men here. The notion is we teach men and women for others. Well, the church needs to embrace those men and women and put them to work as best as possible. We don't really know how to recruit the Chuck Clows of this time. We're not in the recruitment business. We don't understand the power of bringing people like Denise and Chuck into leadership positions of our faith. They understood it with Denise and they understand it with Chuck, but there are Denises and Chucks throughout this room, and the recruitment of them is not strong.
In your work too, Jack, you're all about marketing and storytelling, and the church needs to do a better job at telling its story and the things that it's doing well.
There's an interesting metaphor, and as I saw the picture of Notre Dame Cathedral burning, it occurred to me that, on one side there was a tower still standing, and on the other side, the tower burnt, but it didn't destroy the whole cathedral. And I think, as I reflected on that, I was like, wow, in the Catholic Church, you have, people of great faith, great fundamentals, a religion that we all love. And then you've got this tower that, has to be rebuilt. And it will be rebuilt a different way, but it wasn't completely destroyed. And, I thought, Jesus said, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You sit there and you say, you faced evil in the face in that time. We've all felt the ramifications of it, but it won't destroy the church because there's still a tower standing of people that don't want it to destroy the church. And so that's the call here, is how do you rebuild the second tower again a different way so that, Notre Dame stands tall again. And it just was a sign to me.
I'd just like to read you a quote that I came across maybe for a talk I gave here at the launch of C21, I think in 2002 or something like that. And it reminds me of the goodness of our clergy, the best of our clergy. And I think it's a quote from an English Jesuit. Typically I leave out attribution because I want people to think I wrote it, but some may think of a priest's work in terms of what can be measured by attendance at Mass and the number of people knocking on his door. In fact, the real value of the priest is something hidden and has much more to do with the kind of person he is rather than anything that can be quantified. Nothing much happens most of the time. He's just around, available, trying to listen. For a priest, there is no such thing as success. Success belongs to the world of sport, to banks and business. It has no place in the precincts of the sacred. The priest is sowing, never reaping, so there can be no trophies. His work is to plow the furrow, open up the earth to the seed, trusting that in God's good time, the harvest will come in. This is the poetry and privilege of priesthood.
I can get to one final question. Thank you for that, Jack. How might the church be changed if the hierarchy were as accountable to those, meaning us, in the pews, as public companies are to shareholders?
As long as it's a long-term view and not quarter to quarter.
Any other?
Well, I think they are. I think the result of the, obviously, I mean, the Catholic Church is not the only church dealing with a loss of adherents. It's a very secular society with, and everything outside the life of the church is really sort of inimical to the willingness to live a life of faith. It's not the society is not very supportive of that kind of thing. But it is educated, and of course we have a much more vibrant media, and I think all of these things played a role. I always so joke, now the Crozier's on the other foot, in the sense that there isn't as much power there. There just isn't, and I think this is a good thing. I think the more we become the people of God and less hierarchical, and even Pope Francis has said this, we will become even less clerical. We will become the people of God.
We close out each program with a final question, and we ask 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. What's your hope to share for the church? What's your hope to share for the church?
Look, I mentioned this before, but I see these young people coming out of STM, out of the School of Theology and Ministry, and I've worked with a lot of them. Several have come through my parish and other parishes, and they're the future of the church. I mean, they're the future. We're all the future leadership of the church, but they're really the future of the church. And more are coming out each year, and we have to take care of them. We have to make sure they can have a remunerative experience. They make enough money to live and to build families. But if we're capable of doing that, I think the hope of the church is at a place like STM and places like it.
Yeah.
My hope is that if we focus on education, communication, prayer, and service, and we all do that together and make that commitment, whether you're a baby boomer, whether you're a millennial, whether you're an Asian or a black or a woman, we all can do that together. And that's what the meaning of community in church is. And I think that's very hopeful. Yeah. And I really do believe that was the original model that Jesus wanted.
Yeah.
So my hope has actually already been realized. I came here as a freshman in 1959. No one ran around the reservoir in 1959 or walked around the reservoir. No one, there was no recplex in 1959 to 63. We weren't really taking care of ourselves, particularly when we went to the Tam O'Shanter and had a couple of beers after class. The only thing that happened around the reservoir was on the backside. There was occasional necking that went on in the late evening. You weren't, we were never part of that ourselves, but I mean, when I was here from 1959 to 1963, there were no service groups that were leaving for Appalachia or for Peru or for wherever by the hundreds. So I think the young folks are already making the right moves. They have demonstrated they care about themselves, their health. They've already demonstrated that they care about other people, their service missions, etc. And I think eventually they're going to make things right. And I think they're going to show us a brand new model just as they have in those other areas. So my hope is already being realized.
That's great. So Chuck, Denise, Jack, Thank you so much for your time. You're so busy. All of you were like up and out at 6 this morning. What you've done for the world of business, for Boston College, for our church, for our communities is really unprecedented. Denisha hopped on a plane from Florida at 6 this morning to be here because she knew that the first plane out would get her here. And Jack and Chuck, you're in your offices so early and always making time for invitations and for meeting people, and you are, doing God's work, and we thank you for that. And thank you for all you give to us. And thank you to every single person here tonight that had the choice to sit back home and watch the Bruins or the Celtics. And you were like, this is more important.
What's the score?
Still 0-0? Still 0-0 with the Bruins. Oh, okay.
What's the Celtics score?
Oh, okay. Celtics are close. Again, thank you. We wrap up this Easter series, but we're going to continue with more speaker series. Know that you can find the video of tonight's program on our website, bc.edu/C21, as well as the other 3 programs in the series. Thank you, and God bless. Happy Easter.